Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another fascinating guest today who is helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there. Today, we are continuing on our virtual road trip. We are headed around the globe to Noumea, New Caledonia. And we are having the honor of being joined today by Dr. Stuart Minchin, who is the Director General of the Pacific Community, which is the largest intergovernmental organization in the Pacific, serves as both a science and technology for development organization. It's owned by its 26 member countries and territories in the Pacific region, and their 650 member staff is focused on delivering services and scientific advice to the Pacific across the domains of the oceans, islands, and people, and they have deep expertise in a variety of areas, including food security, water resources, fisheries, energy, health, and education, just to name a few. Dr. Minchin previously served as the chief of the Environmental Geoscience Division of Geoscience Australia and has an extensive background in the management of modeling of environmental data, as well as the online delivery of that data, modeling and reporting tools for improving natural resource management. He has a very long track record of conceiving, developing, and delivering transformational and innovative projects in the environmental and national resource domains. He has represented in the past Australia in key international forums and was Australia's principal delegate to both the United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management Group of Experts, as well as the Intergovernmental Group on Earth Observation. Dr. Minchin has his Ph.D. in aquatic and environmental chemistry from Monash University, where he also did his undergraduate work in both chemistry as well as in aquatic sciences, chemistry, and aquatic biology from Deakin University. We're honored to have him with us today. Dr. Stuart Minchin, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while.
Thanks very much, Ira. It's my great pleasure.
It's great having you with us today, Stuart. I would really, love to start off by talking, a little bit about you. If you could tell us a little bit more about your background, things that got you interested in aquatic and environmental chemistry to begin with. And it was very interesting. I noticed in your sort of the early part of your career journey that you were working on, of all things, batteries for electric cars at the very beginning of your career. Talk a little bit about sort of how you went from that and got so interested in all things environmental and aquatic, let's say.
Oh, that's a good question, Ira. I guess I've grown up with a great love of the ocean and the sea, and I enjoy sailing and windsurfing and surfing. So consequently, as I was growing up, I was thinking about careers that would take me into some interaction with the sea. So my initial dream was to become a marine biologist, and to I think, as many children think about marine biology as swimming around with dolphins and diving. And unfortunately, I had asthma as a child, and that meant that I couldn't get a medical certificate. So when it came time to choose my university course, I was unable to choose marine biology because I needed to be able to dive. So I chose aquatic biology and aquatic chemistry instead, which was more inland freshwater. So that took me into an area of interest. The battery factory that you mentioned, that was if you like my gap year in between high school and university, where I really just wanted to get out and work and earn some money and live a little. But by the end of that year, which it sounds interesting, but it was actually shoveling around 7 tons of lead into a furnace every day, and I realised that I really did want to go to university after that, and it helped to motivate me. So yeah, that was the early days.
Excellent. Yeah. So in looking at a lot of your papers in the peer-reviewed literature in the early days focused on topics like water quality, salinity, groundwater, river health, then moving as you get involved in Australia's National Marine Science Plan, again looking not at sort of the details of the water, but looking from a very sky or space eye view, using the satellite data, using these data cube technologies. Talk a little bit about that part, because I think, as we move into the discussion on everything that you have going on at the current organization, where you're looking at very large swaths of our Earth and of the oceans, talk a little bit about that component of your research back in the day, because I think that ultimately feeds in very nicely to what we're going to be getting into in terms of the Pacific Community's responsibilities.
Sure. Well, I guess my early career out of my PhD was actually in water quality and water resources. So my first job was for one of our state jurisdictions in Australia, was to be monitoring the rivers and lakes and groundwater of that state, and looking after the monitoring network. But I always also had an interest in computing, and the early days of the web, I was experimenting with setting up web pages. So I set up an online database of the water information for that state, which was the first time people had open access to water information in Australia. And that led to me taking that approach national with my time with CSIRO.
Yep.
And then, as often happens, as your career grows, you take on more diverse interests. And in CSIRO, I got involved with Earth observations and remote sensing from satellites. And I was also representing or a member of the National Marine Science Council. So in some ways, my original wish to become a marine biologist had come full circle, and in an alternative pathway, I'd managed to get into marine issues through a different path. And then with Geoscience Australia, ultimately, I was in a position where I wasn't only in charge of the marine science that Geoscience Australia did, but also the satellite imagery work, the Earth observation work, and that allowed me to combine, if you like, this computing and science focus and lead a team that developed the data cube technology for Earth observations, and applying that to the whole of the Australian continent and ultimately to all of Africa as well. So,
excellent. And moving to SPC, or the Pacific Community Organization now, it goes back. You've been supporting the development work that I mentioned in the intro since 1947, made up of a rather large group of countries and territories. And sort of looking at the map here, your domain is everything from, let's say, the Mariana Islands in the north to New Zealand in the south, let's say Palau in the west, and as far east as Pitcairn Island. And here we have a variety of different territories with both sort of marine environment as well as terrestrial environment. Talk a little bit about sort of the organization, about a little bit about how it's governed, sort of where your directives come from in terms of, who calls you up and says, Stuart, we have a fisheries problem here, we have a hydrothermal problem here that we need to deal with. So take us through a little bit of sort of your responsibilities on a daily basis in this rather broad geographic area.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting organisation that, as you said, started in 1947, and it was formed to tackle a unique problem that the Pacific faces. And I'll just share with you what that problem is. And it's when you've got quite a number of island country territories with large ocean areas, small islands, and small populations. Many of those countries have populations of a few thousand people.
Yep.
And consequently, their government, their public service is very small. They might have a public service of a few hundred people. Now, if you're a modern sovereign nation and you're expected to provide all the services and support and facilities that a modern country expects, and you've only got a few hundred people to do it, and you've got to cover everything from policing to hospitals to teachers to judges, public administrators, etc. It's almost impossible with that number of people. Many people are wearing multiple hats. And the challenge they had was that how do you, if your total public service is, 200 or 300 people, how do you build a world-class, capability in fisheries science or in education or in public health, where you might need a few hundred people to do that work, which would be larger than your whole public service. So what they did is they created SPC, the Pacific Community, as the home of the shared capabilities that it did not make sense to try and replicate in every one of those island nations. So we are, if you like, the technical and scientific arm of all of those countries, and we look after their collective expertise, if you like, in science and technology in places where it just couldn't possibly be done at a country by country level. So a good example is our fisheries science. So in the Pacific, in the countries that we serve, 50% of the world's tuna comes from this area, which is a really critical protein source for many people in the world. We have roughly 100 strong fisheries science capability in SPC, which is utilised by all of the countries, all 27 members, to provide advice to them on their policy settings for the tuna fishery. And consequently, we are recognised as world leaders in tuna fisheries science, and in the Pacific is the only tuna fishery in the world that is assessed as being sustainably managed for all of the tuna stocks that we exploit here. Because we have this strong link where the countries absolutely take the science advice from the Pacific Community, and they apply that directly into policy within their own countries. It's been a partnership that's really effective, not just in the fisheries space, of course, but as you mentioned, education, public health, national statistics, climate change, agriculture. We provide these services, if you like, that the countries could not afford to develop that expertise themselves. And even if they did it in one area, they couldn't do it in all areas. So it's been a fascinating journey for me, taking on this role, which is, a great opportunity working with our members. I'm governed so I'm the CEO effectively. We are truly intergovernmental and the way I explain it to people, we're like a mini United Nations. My board, if you like, is made up of the prime ministers and presidents of the countries and territories involved, and they give me guidance through a governance meeting every 2 years, and I'm effectively delegated to run the organisation in the intervening time.
And and we will put the links to the website, of course, and as well as the strategic plan. But in the sort of the partnership section, aside from the state and the governments that are involved, you have really a rather pristine sort of set of I'll say other international partners, everyone from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United States Center for Disease Control, UNICEF. I mean, the list goes on and on. Talk a little bit about sort of some of these organizations. What their particular interests are when you think about the Pacific community. If you could say a few words about that as well.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is that even though we are, 650, 700 staff in the Pacific, we can't be experts at everything, right. And we need to partner to ensure that the region and the governments in the region, the people in the region, benefit from the best knowledge that can be provided. So we do that sometimes as a pathway, because it's easier, if you like, for us to have technical discussions with the Centre for Disease Control with our public health team, yep, than an official in a country who may not have the technical expertise to have that conversation. So we provide a conduit for those more global organisations to engage. And the second bigger issue, if you like, is that many of these partners are working at a global level, and they come to the Pacific sometimes with approaches to development that have been developed for Africa and Asia, where there's lots of people. So capacity development works differently in that area, and when they come to the Pacific, they realise that the old paradigms for capacity development don't work. You can run training courses all you want in the Pacific, but if there's only 2 people that you're training, they've only got a limited capacity to absorb new skills and new capabilities. So those organisations have realised that they need to partner with the shared capability like SBC. Which is effectively an extension of those member governments. It's just a shared extension that's collectively owned by the whole region.
Okay, excellent. So, as mentioned, Stuart, in the on the website, anyone can go and check out the SBC strategic plan, entitled Strategic Plan 2022 to 2031, Sustainable Pacific Development through Science, Knowledge, and Innovation. And you outline and you have quite a few sectors that you're involved in. And I thought that we could talk about a few of these. And a couple of these, I guess, I'll combine because you have, let's say, natural resources and biodiversity, food systems, and then sort of I'll bring in sort of sustainable economy here because obviously, you mentioned the fisheries and the tuna. Clearly, in this geographic area, you not just have the sort of the marine biodiversity, but the unique terrestrial biodiversities of these different countries, and an interesting topic for us has always been, obviously biodiversity provides calories, but it also provides potentially many other things. The pharmaceutical industry, which I come out of, owes most of its success to natural products derived from fungal and plant and marine, biodiversity sources, generating literally hundreds of billions of dollars. So, I see potentially in this particular set of segments, many possibilities for economic development, diversification. Talk a little bit about some of these initiatives, if you would, and then I don't know if it was before I had a cosmetic company partner that was actually doing work out in, I forget, it was a Chanel or LVMH. Somebody was working on New Caledonia a few years ago, looking at plant biodiversity for sort of cosmetics, cosmeceuticals, things of this nature. Talk about some of sort of these higher value opportunities as well, if you would.
Sure. Well, look, I think the real challenge for the Pacific, and this has become more marked after the COVID crisis is diversification of economic opportunity. So the region has really been dependent on tourism, which has been shown to be fragile under a situation like COVID, where effectively the major earner for the region collapsed for a number of years. Fisheries being the second big one, the tuna fishery being a key one, of course. But then these countries are not rich in traditional resources in most cases. Mining and small areas of land. So agriculture is not a huge earner for the region. So they've got to look for alternative pathways for economic development. And there are real opportunities. Some of those opportunities are about exploiting other pathways, as you mentioned. Like finding high value products, but one of the challenges we have in the region is it is remote, and getting those products to market can be difficult and expensive. So there are manifest challenges in developing those kind of things. One of the things we're looking at more generally is digital transformation and what that could offer in the region. We've got things like Elon Musk's Starlink capability coming onto the market now, where traditionally the region has only been able to be connected through undersea cables, which are very expensive. And we're faced with the possibility that we could potentially connect every village with high-speed broadband using things like Elon Musk's Starlink system. And that could allow the opportunity for people in the region to interact in the digital marketplace, selling services that are not normally exploited in this region because of the lack of connectivity. So we're looking at many possibilities. The other angle, of course, is that as you mentioned, we cover a huge geographic area. It's almost a third of the planet, and an area that's faced by the crisis of existential crisis of climate change impacts. We're seeing real impacts in this region already. So are there opportunities, for example, for protection of ecosystems, blue carbon, etc., where polluting countries or corporations that wish to protect and buy offsets can pay for the conservation and protection of such a huge and diverse part of our planet that could provide an income source for some of these countries that does not rely completely on tourism and fisheries.
Yeah, I know that you participated in the Our Oceans 2022 conference. President Whips was on the show a couple weeks ago from Palau, and he spoke about this specifically, this strategy of, again, using this important tool that we have, the ocean, as not just something that we pull resources from, but as a sink for carbon. And I know that this is, as you were saying, the theme of resilience of obviously the Pacific people, but resilience as a tool for climate action, and ultimately this other section, planetary health. Talk a little bit about how you're sort of positioning the Pacific community message for this planetary health story per conferences like Ocean 2022.
Yeah, look, the planetary health theme is really is meant to be encompassing. It's not just about the health of the planet, of course, but recognizing that health is, from a public health perspective, human health perspective, is not the whole picture. And we have to be working on the environment that we live in, on animal health,
Yep.
alongside human health within the region. I think the region's very keen not to be seen, and the Pacific people are keen not to be seen as victims, if you like,
Right.
but to have some agency in dealing with these issues. There's an interesting development that's actually happened in Australia in the last couple of years, which I think illustrates what opportunities you mentioned about the biodiversity and the health and the climate change issues, where this all comes together. And it's an interesting one. There's a seaweed that's being discovered in Tasmania in Australia that's now being farmed. And they discovered that if they feed this seaweed as a supplement to cows, that they actually stop producing methane. Not only do they stop producing methane, but they grow quicker. So there's a benefit for the farmer to feed this seaweed as part of the feed to their cows. They grow quicker, they put on weight quicker for market, and it stops the production of methane, which is a huge greenhouse gas challenge. So, is there an opportunity? So I know, for example, that this particular species of seaweed has a tropical version and a subspecies and a temperate subspecies. The Australians are using the temperate subspecies. Is there an opportunity in the Pacific for us to be farming seaweed, the tropical version, and exporting that to the rest of the world, so that it doesn't only create a business opportunity, but it also has a direct impact on the climate emissions of countries that are relying on cattle for food and production. So it's these kind of innovative solutions that the Pacific's looking to develop, and not just sit by and wait for things to happen to us.
No, that's an excellent example. Now, I love hearing stories like that cross over sort of the different domains, as you were saying. It sort of it feeds back sort of this One Health theme in a way that we get into on the show occasionally when we talk about sort of the intersection between human health and animal health and ultimately the environment. So no, that's a great example. What in terms of some, we mentioned a little bit about sort of your collaboration with organizations like the United States CDC, and I know public health surveillance is a hot topic for you as well. Been some interesting stories sort of coming out of the region, during the COVID situation. Any interesting insights again as you think about public health and sort of, God forbid, but managing sort of future pandemics and the dynamics in such a unique geography as you are involved in? Any interesting insights from the public health surveillance side of things from the last couple of years?
Yeah, look, well, I think most people would acknowledge that the Pacific was hugely vulnerable to the COVID crisis, but actually managed the crisis particularly well, and kept numbers and deaths very low. This I actually put down to a couple of things. One is that we created 25 years ago the Pacific Public Health Surveillance Network, which is a network of public health professionals amongst all the countries who get together regularly to talk about public health issues. So when COVID occurred, there was already this strong network of clinicians and physicians and whatnot that were already used to working together in the region. There was also some work done a few years ago, about 10 years ago, for pandemic preparedness in the region. There was actually some specific work done. So when the pandemic broke out, we had very clear communication lines with all of the public health professionals in the region. The public health departments were all connected. They were all talking to each other. And then when WHO engaged with the region, they were able to plug straight into the network that SPC already had, and we were able to work very effectively to get communication advice to our countries about when they should close borders, how they should deal with things. Now it was always their decision as to what they did, but most of them immediately took that advice and implemented it. And we were also, because we had this network in place, we were able to do some innovative things. So one example, we had, through the Public Health Surveillance Network, we've been working on getting testing devices for tuberculosis to each of the countries, so that they have the ability to with cartridges to test for tuberculosis. So we immediately contacted the manufacturer of that testing device and asked if they could create a COVID test that could use the same tools, because we didn't have PCR in most of the countries, and none of the antigen tests were available at that point in time. So within a couple of weeks, the company had managed to create a cartridge for COVID, and we were able to order 100,000 of them into the region and get the ability for these countries that had no ability to test for COVID and get them up and running. We then faced the problem, which was really interesting, that many of the countries had closed their borders. So how did we actually get the medical supplies and the testing kits to those countries when there were no flights operating, and that they had effectively put up the barriers? So we had to actually partner with our kind of political leadership within the Pacific through the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, and we created, we enlisted their help in creating what's called the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway Program, which was effectively all of the governments agreeing that for these medical supplies for COVID, that there would be protocols that we would be able to still allow a flight to occur for the purpose of delivering critical medical supplies, as long as it followed certain protocols, and that then enabled us to get testing capability out, to get vaccines out when they appeared on the market, and it enabled those countries to safely manage their transition out of lockdown into open engagement again. So hugely important in the region, and very successful, because there was that long-term investment in building trust and knowledge in the region.
Excellent, really excellent. Stuart, within the strategic plan, key focus area number 4 is focused on equity, education, and social development. And again, you are managing, let's say, an area with very diverse peoples, and not just thinking about the issues that come along when you are projecting forward and thinking about social development over the next decade, educational equality, gender equality, and so forth. Talk a little bit about this key focus item, because it is obviously a very important topic in 2023. But at the same time, if you could also touch on a little bit of your work per the Pacific Youth Development Framework, and a little bit of sort of getting sort of the next generation, whether it's Palau or Pitcairn Island or everything in between, ready for some of these next generation changes that we're going to be seeing in the Pacific community.
Yeah, look, our focus in SPC is not just on the science, if you like. It's also on the culture, on support for social issues within the region. So as you highlight, this area of, I guess, human rights, gender issues, disability, inclusiveness, political engagement, youth, etc., we provide a whole range of support to our member countries in developing that. As you mentioned, we do have diversity in our member countries. We have, for example, some member countries that support gay marriage at the moment, and others that where there's I guess much more traditional views that dominate. So we have to support all of those diverse views, and our region is also, unfortunately, one of the top regions of the world for violence against women and girls, and so we're actively working with our gender team, and we have a big program called Pacific Women Lead, to try and address these issues of not only gender equity, but addressing the basic challenges of violence against women and girls in the region, and addressing those issues, which are often, I think, wrongly called cultural issues, in that which kind of makes the assumption that something about the cultures in the region is inherently negative towards women, and it's actually not the case. A lot of it's got to do with levels of education, and you mentioned youth. One of the key determinants of success, and is education in the region, and so that's why we have such a big program of education quality across the Pacific, where we do consistent testing of education standards across the different countries, through a common platform of testing of education levels at different stages through the primary and secondary school curriculum. We help countries set consistent curriculum, and that has to keep innovating. So I mentioned before the digital transformation opportunity. In order to be able to exploit those kind of opportunities, you need the youth that are going through the education program to become familiar with what with the use of these tools, and developing new skills that they haven't had to develop before, coding and other things, that means that there's a constant transformation and adjustment of curriculums in the region.
Excellent. Stuart, I mentioned earlier on, your involvement with our Ocean 2022. I think that occurred fairly virtually several months ago. Any other, as we're coming out of the last couple of years, any other major conferences of that nature that are coming up, other initiatives, conferences that you're going to be presenting at, places that we could listen to you, meet you, per the Pacific Community Initiatives? Anything else coming up that you want to mention?
Oh, look, there are one of the challenges in this role is you could be on the road every day, and there are really important engagements that we collectively make as an organisation each year. So we're always involved in the COP process for climate change and for biodiversity. We get involved in the UN General Assembly week, supporting our countries with their engagements there. There are upcoming ocean conferences in the region. There'll be one in Tahiti later in the year. There are a whole range of these issues, but we, because of our role in the Pacific as, if you like, extensions of the member countries as well, we actually have a lot of engagement with things like the leaders meeting, the Pacific Island Forum's leaders meeting, which will be held in the Cook Islands later this year. And we have our own governance program. So we have the Conference of the Pacific Community, which will be held in Tuvalu in early November next year. So that's Tuvalu is one of the atoll nations most most impacted and at risk from climate change. So it will be a real opportunity to highlight the issues of climate change and climate finance in the region, which is really a critical need at this point in time.
Absolutely. We talked about biodiversity, both marine and terrestrial. We talked about energy and carbon sequestration. Elon Musk's Starlink. Anything else that's on the radar? Other industry segments, other technological initiatives that I missed that you may want to highlight that we may not think about today, but as I said, you have a decade-long plan here. Anything else that I missed that you might want to mention in terms of the future development of the region?
Look, I think a couple of things I'll mention that your viewers might find interesting. So one is that we run the Centre for Pacific Crops and Trees in the region, and this is like the Noah's Ark for the biodiversity of Pacific crops and tree species, where we keep the genetic seed banks and we propagate important crops in the region like taro and others. So when issues happen in the Pacific, like the Tonga eruption and subsequent tsunami that occurred, Tonga had most of their crops wiped out. So we were able to deliver over $100,000 worth of seeds to allow them to immediately start to regrow and provide that food security again after that event. So we're playing a greater and greater role in the region, not just doing the science, but actually actively being the custodian of some of the key genetic and biodiversity resources in the region itself. The second thing I really want to highlight is this issue of climate finance. So you'd be aware that commitments have been made at Glasgow and at the various COP negotiations that polluting countries would contribute $100 billion a year to help countries that are impacted by climate change adjust and adapt. The big problem is that firstly that money was committed and hasn't been flowing. So we've got a drip feed going on into the region. It's our assessment that just in direct commitments to the Pacific, that there's over $4 to $5 billion being committed over the next 3 or 4 years to the Pacific, but at the moment it's only actually hitting the ground at the kind of $10 to $20 million per year rate. So it would have to we'd have to increase the translation of that commitment to actually on ground investment by hundreds of times over in order to actually have that commitment that makes everyone feel warm and fuzzy actually make a difference in the region. So a classic example I can give you is energy transformation. So many of the Pacific Island countries are still reliant on diesel generators to produce power. So what's happened with the war in the Ukraine and the cost of oil and everything else is that some countries are spending 30% of their national GDP just to keep the fuel going, to keep the power and keep the lights on, basically. And that's a huge economic impost to the region. They haven't been able to make the energy transition to renewables because there's such a small part of the problem on the global mitigation stage for carbon dioxide emissions that they've never been prioritised for actually funding to transform to renewables. But when you look at the impacts of adaptation, the impacts on their development of spending 30% of your national budget just keeping the lights on, we argue that the priority really rises there, and there's an opportunity over the next 5 or 10 years to transition the Pacific to renewable energy, not because it's going to make a huge issue or a huge impact on the global emissions, but because it'll make a huge impact to their ability to develop, to adapt to the challenges that are being faced at the moment with climate change. And it's a little bit like a voice is crying out in the dark at the moment, where it's not the Pacific's getting pretty frustrated that at the moment the money is not flowing, and it seems to be the polluting countries that are making the decisions about where the money goes and how it goes. So it's a bit frustrating, and something that everyone should be aware of.
Got it. No, I appreciate you exposing us to that theme as well. Stuart, while I have you, I know this isn't an SPC issue directly, but I have to ask while I have you, because as I was researching you and reading all about you prior to this episode, I ran into several of the articles from when you were the chief in geoscience at Geoscience Australia, specifically focusing on as they were searching for MH370, the airline. There was a lot of insights that came off that in terms of geology and the fisheries and some other interesting finds. I was just wondering if you could just say, while we have you, a couple words about that, and I guess second part of that, any hope for tracking down that airplane, you think?
Yeah, look, that was a really fascinating project to be involved with, and how it came about was really, as I mentioned, I was in charge of the marine science capability at Geoscience Australia, and we used to do surveys of the ocean floor for oil and gas assessment and for geological assessment. So when MH370 went missing, and it became clear within a short period of time that the plane had crashed into the Indian Ocean, we approached the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, who were in charge of the aviation kind of investigation, and said, "Look, do you need some help?" And they said, "Yes, please. We've got no idea how to do a search in the ocean, and you guys are the experts. So can you help us?" So I joined the board, the search board, and we developed the plan of attack for the search. And this was just a huge challenge because 6 kilometres deep, traditional sonar from the surface would not be adequate to pick out aircraft pieces from that, through that depth of water. So we had to design a program of work that involved surface reconnaissance first with ship sonar to create an undersea map effectively, to then allow a side scan sonar device, which is about the size of a small car, to be towed at about 100 metres above the seabed and not on the end of a 10-kilometre cable up to a ship. That and have it not run into undersea mountains, for example. So, logistically, this was a huge challenge. We had to spin up from what was an occasional survey process to a 24/7 operation, and it was a fascinating process to be part of, and very visible. I mean, I got calls from, and I got interviewed on radio, and I got calls from people in the US that that everyone was interested in this missing plane. unfortunately, as you said, we didn't find the plane. We found pieces of the plane washed up in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
There was some incredible science done, for example, using the barnacles off the pieces of floating wreckage that washed up in Africa. We were able to do X-ray analysis of the temperature regime that those barnacles had grown in, and that allowed us to backwards model the ocean currents and provided more evidence about the likely location of the plane. The big challenge, though, is that it was a huge area, and what we can be confident of is that the area that was searched by the side scan did not contain the plane, but we weren't able to complete the whole search area because of cost. And then at some point, a political decision was made, which is what politicians do about how much further costs could be borne in doing the search versus the public interest and other uses of that money. So it was disappointing to finish without finding the plane, but I'm actually confident that as technologies develop, there'll be some point where it is able to be found in the future.
Gotcha.
And I think for the families involved, it would be great to bring them closure. So I was very proud of that program, though, because one of the things I said at the very beginning in the negotiations with the Transport Safety Bureau was, we will help you with this search on one condition, and that is that you make all the data available to the scientific community at the end of the search.
Right.
And that they were able to do that, and we were able to even tweak some of the things. So the ships were coming in and out to the search zone, and I asked them to traverse on slightly different lines and to collect their data on the way in and out. And we actually collected nearly 800,000 square kilometres more data from their ship lines coming in and out to the search zone than we had in the search zone itself. And that was all valuable data for the world's scientists to understand the sea floor and unique terrain in a very remote part of the world that would never have otherwise been captured.
Right. No, I appreciate you sharing that snippet of your story, Stuart, because it really it goes just to show the diversity of everything that you've been involved in, and obviously why you are in the current position where you are with your capabilities and forward thinking to execute on this strategic plan. It's really a fascinating portfolio that you have there, and it's so diverse, and really wishing you the best with all of it as you move it forward, you and your team there at SPC. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of the show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Stuart Minchin, Director General of the Pacific Community, doing really amazing things to deliver science, technology, services, ultimately to create a healthier, more resilient region throughout the Pacific. Stuart, I want to thank you for your time again and coming to discuss some of these topics with us and educate us on these matters. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there in the Pacific community. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via what you're doing. Really very, very impressive story.
Yeah. Thanks, Ira, and great to talk to you.
Good having you.